Pittsburgh Steelers, they might have had a winning record this season, so, things are kept intact for Mike Tomlin, but it was a season that they didn't make the playoffs. They had a lot of kind of back and forth at quarterback between injuries and not deciding which quarterback to start. How do you feel they're set up with the quarterbacks going into 2023?
I really like Kenny Pickett. I can't get my head around what people don't love. He has, he's produced, he's won on the field. He's not been incredible from a fantasy perspective, but it was starting to come together as we got to the end of the year. And as speaking with my dynasty hat on, look, there's like 17, 18 quarterbacks in the league that we're comfortable as an asset for next year. Kenny Pickett's one of those. If you are looking for a cheap, affordable QB2, maybe, preferably a QB3, you can go so much worse than Kenny Pickett. The guy had a league low 1.7% touchdown rate. That is unheard of. That is so pathetically low. It has to regress next year. You give him a 4-5% touchdown rate, which is about league average. We're not talking about any incredible amount here. And all of a sudden, he goes from the quarterback 35 in points per game to the quarterback 20 in points per game. That's suddenly amazing for a rookie season on an offense that we know has got great receiving weapons. So, yeah, I think Kenny Pickett's being slept on, being forgotten about, and it's blasphemy the way he's being talked about right now.
So, picking up on what you said there about the really low touchdowns, that was felt across the whole offense. Like that, everybody could have done with more touchdowns in this Steelers offense. And if they had them, I think we'd be talking about this team completely different. I mean, Deontay Johnson, somebody we both love, no touchdowns, but he had a big season in terms of targets and stuff like that. How do you feel about him, how his season and going into next year?
Look, it's become a bit of a trope now, me hyping up Deontay Johnson, but the most sticky stat in terms of wide receiver production from a correlation standpoint is targets and target share. Deontay Johnson was 8th in targets and finished at 29th in points. Like, it doesn't make sense. As you said, touchdowns is a big part of that. I think this offense is going to take a big step forward. Another year with Kenny Pickett at the helm, a full season. We're not going to be going, as you said, back and forth between the quarterbacks. And I think that Deontay Johnson, but also George Pickens are potential options to outproduce what they did this year.
Okay, and then just so someone else who could possibly outproduce what they did this year if things fall right is probably Najee Harris. He found himself in a bit of more of a committee than he'd had last season. He had, I think, sort of 40 targets less than last season. So the role definitely diminished. But do you think that Jaylen Warren has now solidified this role that he is going to be the 1B or the RB2 in this offense? Or do you think a healthy Najee Harris in 2023 could take that role back and make it his?
I don't see Jaylen Warren solidifying that, number 2, 1B, whatever you want to call it, as a bad thing. To me, that's good because that means that the Steelers aren't going to go and spend draft capital, aren't going to go and spend free agents' money on bringing in somebody to compete with Najee Harris. Yes, he was disappointing this year. Yes, he was an obvious fade after his incredible production last year, but he was injured. I don't think people talk about, in camp, we were having question marks about whether he was going to be healthy at all this year, whether he was going to have to not play all year. He's played through that all year. He said he's not been healthy all year, and he's still been reliable. I think, look, I don't love him. I don't like what I would class him as, which is a volume-based RB2. But I think that the hate is maybe getting to a point where it's going too far.
Okay, so for you, what needs to improve for the Steelers for all these options to be more fantasy viable going into 2023?
2 things. New play caller, offensive line. It's as simple as that. This offense has been absolutely atrocious. Like, I don't think it's just abysmal. Enough said. And the offensive line, shockingly, if you don't invest in an offensive line and you go and spend a first-round pick on a running back, it doesn't make a great run game. You need to invest in both. And I think if they can address that offensive line, spend some of those draft resources there, maybe go out and find someone in free agency and bring in a new offensive mind, this offense could absolutely blow up next year.
Just one last thing before we get out of here. Pat Freiermuth. I mean, he only had 2 touchdowns this year, which was down from 7 last year. Are you confident that if this sort of rising tide lifts all boats approach to the offense, where if Kenny Pickett's going to have progression and see more touchdowns, do you feel like he can do better than he did this year?
Yeah, I think look, he outproduced in the touchdown rate as a rookie. He was 8.8% as a rookie. This year he was at 2%. It's, that's the big reason from a fantasy production standpoint. He still finished as the tight end 9 on the season, averaging almost 10 points a game. He's an okay asset. I don't feel particularly excited about him. I don't think he's ever going to break into that top 3, 4, 5, whatever at the tight end position. But as he's kind of the cheapest plug and play guy that you feel comfortable with, isn't he?
Okay, and just talking about ceiling, how high do you think George Pickens' ceiling is? Because it feels to me like there'll be a lot of discourse this season where he gets drafted ahead of Deontay Johnson by some people. Some people will be that much more interested in redraft and best ball that they would rather take him over Deontay Johnson because Johnson burned so many people by not getting touchdowns this season.
Yeah, and I think this is where we perhaps fantasize over the Calvin Johnson-esque wide receiver rather than solid production. I think people look at Deontay Johnson. He's not big, he's not fast, he's not a prototypical outside receiver, and people go, "Oh well, he's not sexy, he's not interesting for me from fantasy." And they see George Pickens, who is an Adonis and 6'3", 4", whatever he is, and he is that prototypical outside guy. Deontay Johnson just gets open for fun. And I think that, yes, George Pickens, you could argue, has more ceiling if he saw the same target volume as Deontay Johnson. But I don't think they're ever going to see the same target volume. I think Deontay Johnson can get open for fun. I think George Pickens is going to win on contested routes. And I think, look, Kenny Pickett's a good, accurate quarterback, but he's not going to just consistently throw the ball to George Pickens 10, 12 times a game when he's not open.
Yeah, I think George Pickens, it's big plays rather than big scores. It's 6 games over 14 points, but none over 19. So it's kind of like, he makes the wow highlight catches, but so far we've not really seen him blow up and break a slate or really win you a week in fantasy yet.